It was the evening of September 7, 1940, when Hermann Göring stood on the chalk cliffs of the French coast, binoculars pressed against his face, watching the sky fill with hundreds of his Luftwaffe bombers heading toward Britain. He believed he was witnessing the end of the Royal Air Force. His intelligence officers had assured him that the RAF was finished, that the British had barely 100 fighters left in the air. Since mid-August, his bombers had torn through airfields like thunder, turning hangars into piles of twisted steel and cratering runways until they looked like the surface of the moon. Every map, every photograph, every report seemed to confirm it. Fighter command was collapsing. The German pilots returned with gun camera footage of burning Spitfires and Hurricanes, of hangars exploding, of runways ripped apart. Göring smiled with pride, confident that one final blow would wipe the RAF from the skies and open the way for invasion. But what he did not know, what his entire intelligence network could not see, was that Britain had quietly built an invisible defense. Beneath the surface of the destruction, hidden in the green fields and quiet farms of southern England, the RAF still breathed, still fought, and still flew from airfields that did not officially exist. These were the ghost bases, secret satellite strips carved into farmlands, camouflaged with hedgerows and livestock, invisible even to the sharp eyes of German reconnaissance. They were not marked on any map, not mentioned in any pre-war file, and when German planes flew over them, they saw only countryside. Yet from these secret fields, Britain's fighters rose again and again, as if conjured from the mist itself. The idea of these hidden airfields began long before the bombs fell. As early as 1938, the Air Ministry had realized that fixed air bases were dangerous targets. One heavy bombing raid could destroy an entire squadron if all the aircraft were parked in one place. So, while Germany was building huge, permanent concrete runways for its Luftwaffe, the British quietly chose a different path: mobility, flexibility, and deception. They began surveying open fields, farmlands, and meadows all across southern England, looking for ground flat enough for fighters to land. They marked hundreds of potential sites, often just simple patches of grass that could be used as emergency landing strips. By the time war came, these fields had become part of a secret network, a web of satellite bases that surrounded every major RAF station. If a main base like Tangmere or Biggin Hill was bombed, its squadrons would simply scatter to the nearby satellites and continue fighting. The system was simple but brilliant. Never let the enemy destroy what he can see, because what he sees is not the whole picture. The Germans believed airfields were fixed, permanent, immovable. The British turned theirs into living, breathing organisms that could move, vanish, and reappear. When the Luftwaffe unleashed its great offensive on August 13th, known as Adlertag, Eagle Day, it seemed unstoppable. More than 1,500 German aircraft filled the sky. Bombs rained down on Britain's airfields. The names of those bases, Kenley, Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, Manston, became synonymous with destruction. Photographs showed hangars flattened, craters gouged deep into the soil, and smoke rising in thick black columns. German intelligence concluded that fighter command must be dying. But every morning, when their bombers crossed the channel again, Spitfires and Hurricanes were waiting for them. Not in handfuls, but in full squadrons. The math made no sense to the Germans. They thought the British were rebuilding fighters overnight or flying patched-up wrecks. Göring accused his pilots of exaggerating kills. He shouted at his intelligence officers. None of them understood that the RAF's real strength was not where they were looking. The visible airfields were decoys. The real war was being fought from places they didn't even know existed. Across southern England, from Portsmouth to Colchester, from Kent to Sussex, the RAF operated more than 70 satellite fields. Some were elaborate, with proper grass runways and dispersal areas. Others were little more than open fields with a windsock and a few fuel drums hidden under trees. The planes were camouflaged under netting woven with real branches. From above, they looked like clusters of bushes. Ground crews disguised fuel tanks as barns and grain silos. Wooden frames were built to look like farm buildings, but inside them were steel fuel containers holding thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. The smell of cows and hay mixed with the sharp scent of gasoline. In some places, sheep actually grazed on the runways until moments before takeoff. A farmhand, really an RAF mechanic in civilian clothes, would whistle, the animals would scatter, and a few minutes later the roar of a Merlin engine would shake the ground. Then, as soon as the fighter vanished into the clouds, the sheep returned, hiding the evidence once more. Hiding hangars was harder, but the British engineers had their own tricks. They used lightweight Bellman hangars, collapsible structures of steel frames and canvas that could be put up or taken down in hours. When not in use, they were dismantled and hidden in barns or hedgerows. When assembled, they were covered with camouflage nets and fresh leaves. From above, they looked like trees. At some bombed-out airfields, the deception went even deeper. After heavy raids, the RAF built fake hangars that looked destroyed, charred frames, broken roofs, piles of debris, while the real ones were hidden under camouflage nearby. German reconnaissance would fly over, photograph the ruins, and report the base as destroyed, never realizing that fighters were taking off from the same location hours later. Take Tangmere, for example, one of the most important fighter stations in southern England. In August 1940, the Luftwaffe hit it with everything it had. Stuka dive bombers screamed down, dropping 500-pound bombs that tore through the buildings and cratered the runways. The photographs looked like proof of victory. 14 people were dead, the operations room destroyed, the airfield a wreck. German intelligence declared Tangmere out of action. Yet within 48 hours, Spitfires and Hurricanes were once again flying from the area. The secret was that Tangmere wasn't just one airfield. It was 6. Its squadrons had already moved to satellite fields: Westhampnet, Merston, Shopwike, Oving, Goodwood, and Poling. Westhampnet, hidden just a few miles away, became the new heart of operations. Fighters taxied out from under trees, roared into the sky, and met the enemy over the channel. To the Germans, it seemed impossible. They believed they had bombed Tangmere to rubble, yet Tangmere kept fighting because Tangmere had become an idea, not a place. The same pattern repeated everywhere. Northolt had Horn and Harrowbeer. Biggin Hill had Gravesend. Hawkinge had Limpner and Detling. Every time the Germans thought they had destroyed a base, they had only hit its shadow. The pilots themselves lived in strange, almost surreal conditions. Many were billeted in country houses or farm cottages near the fields. At Westhampnet, the Polish pilots of 145 squadrons slept in Goodwood House, a grand estate filled with paintings and fine furniture. In the mornings, they would walk through the dew-covered grass to their camouflaged Hurricanes parked among the trees. They would fight over the channel, then return to eat lunch beneath chandeliers. Others lived far more roughly. At Merston, pilots slept in tents. They washed in streams, ate canned food, and used lanterns for light. There was mud everywhere, cold wind at night, but they didn't care. They had planes, fuel, and ammunition. That was enough. The ground crews were the true magicians. Young men barely out of their teens, working in open fields with no workshops or proper tools, they kept the fighters alive. They patched bullet holes with fabric and dope, replaced shattered windscreens, and refueled aircraft in the rain and mud. They worked by moonlight, their hands numb, their uniforms soaked with oil and fuel. Yet they never stopped. When a Spitfire landed, they swarmed over it like ants, rearming and refueling in less than 10 minutes. Sometimes the pilot stayed in the cockpit, engines still ticking, while the armorers reloaded the Browning machine guns. Then the Spitfire roared back into the sky, joining the same battle it had just left. That speed made the RAF seem endless to the enemy. German bomber crews reported fighting wave after wave of fighters, never realizing many were the same aircraft returning again and again from different hidden fields. German intelligence failed not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked imagination. They looked for what they expected to find: big airfields, concrete runways, visible hangars. Their aerial photographs showed open countryside, so they assumed there was nothing there. Even when the pictures revealed aircraft parked near farm buildings, analysts dismissed them as storage or training areas. Their agents on the ground, most of whom had been captured and turned by British counterintelligence, sent back reports confirming what Berlin already believed: the RAF was almost finished. Signals intelligence picked up RAF radio traffic but couldn't locate the transmitters. Everything the Germans learned reinforced their illusion. They thought they were bombing the heart of fighter command, but they were only scratching the surface. The decisive moment came on September 15, 1940, later known as Battle of Britain Day. That morning, Göring's aircrews gathered for their briefings. They were told the RAF had only a few dozen fighters left. They expected an easy day, light resistance, quick victory. Around 11:30 a.m., the first wave of over 400 German aircraft crossed the coast, heading for London. But as they reached the Kent countryside, the sky filled with Spitfires and Hurricanes. 12 here, 16 there, then more coming from every direction. The bombers were torn apart. Radio chatter was filled with confusion. How could there still be so many British fighters? By the afternoon, Goring ordered an even larger second wave, over 600 aircraft. Again, they were met by fierce opposition. The RAF flew more than 300 sorties that day, an impossible number for an air force supposedly on its last legs. Goring's illusion shattered. The satellite network had given fighter command the ability to launch, land, refuel, and relaunch faster than anyone imagined. The same aircraft that fought in the morning battle were back in the air for the afternoon one. The Germans thought they were facing new squadrons. In truth, they were fighting the same pilots, just rearmed, refueled, and relentless. By the end of the day, the Luftwaffe had lost 56 aircraft. The RAF lost 29. But the psychological victory was far greater. Hitler's dream of invasion began to fade. 2 days later, on September 17th, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. Officially, it was due to bad weather, but the truth was clear. The Luftwaffe had failed to gain air superiority. Goring's intelligence was in ruins. His report said the RAF was dying, yet every mission encountered fierce resistance. The British airfields he thought destroyed were still active. The skies he thought empty were filled with fighters. The invasion fleet waiting on the French coast would never sail. The ghost airfields of Britain had done their job. Life on those secret fields continued long after the Battle of Britain ended. Pilots and crews adapted to their rough, nomadic existence. They learned to live without comfort, to fight from anywhere. Some days were filled with boredom, waiting for the telephone to ring. Then suddenly the bell would jangle, scramble, and within minutes the field came alive. Engines coughed into life, camouflaged nets were thrown aside, and the roar of takeoff shook the hedgerows. The sound echoed across the countryside like thunder, a sound every villager came to know, the sound of defiance. Farmers paused in their fields to watch the silver shapes climbing into the sky, leaving trails that caught the sun. They knew those planes might not return, but they cheered anyway. In those moments, the hidden fields became symbols of hope, proof that Britain still fought. The story of these hidden airfields is not just about planes or battles. It is about the power of imagination in war, the idea that cleverness can defeat strength, that what the enemy cannot see can hurt him most. Goring believed victory came from numbers, from force and fire. Britain answered with deception, patience, and quiet courage. The Luftwaffe bombed what it could see, and Britain fought from what could not be seen. In that invisible struggle, the fate of the free world hung in the balance. So when we remember the Battle of Britain, we often think of the Spitfire pilots, the few who faced impossible odds. But behind every sortie, every interception, stood the men and women of the invisible airfields. They built fake barns, rolled out nets, refueled in the mud, and made the impossible possible. They gave the illusion of endless strength when there was none to spare. They turned fields and farms into fortresses of air and courage. And because of them, the sky over Britain stayed free.